Thank you guys so much. It is such a wonderful pleasure to be here with you tonight. So, raise your hands if you know what you're having for dinner tonight. All right, keep your hands up for the moment. How about, keep them up if you know what you're doing next year. How about if you know what you want to do with the rest of your life? Okay, that's about what I expected. You're pretty rare in the world. And I bet the answer you have in your mind now has probably changed over time and over the decades. Nobody really knows what the future holds, and we all have one life to live. So today, yes, as discussed, I'm going to tell you a lot about starting RUNA, a wonderful organization and beverage company supporting forests, farmers, communities, and livelihoods in the Ecuadorian Amazon by making beverages out of the amazing guayusa leaf that we've shared around the world. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the characters I've met along the way and the lessons I learned from them. But I'm going to start by sharing some stories from my own life and how I spent the last decade working to where I got right now in this room with you. Because we all have our own story, and those stories make us who they are and hopefully can share a lot about us and what we have to share with the world. Now, I haven't done something like this before. As a lot of you guys have heard already, I'm not full-time with RUNA anymore, so this is new for me, and bear with me a little bit. But I'm excited. I'm excited to share the journey, because every journey starts somewhere, and destinations can change along the way, and you're always going to go where the universe meant you to be, as long as you're paying attention and looking for the signs on the road. So here we go. So I grew up in the woods outside Cleveland. I spent my time hiking, exploring, just being a kid. I also used to go to the ponds and pick turtles and amphibians and frogs. My parents loved that one. And collect them in cages and keep them around. And this led to a childhood fantasy of being a marine biologist. Now, a lot of people love whales and dolphins and want to be marine biologists. I actually stuck with it. I went to college and thought that's what I was going to do. And I worked in a lab in college, and I loved seeing how those systems work. It was so fascinating. But at the same time, spending time working in a lab, working with professors, I recognized that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in a lab publishing papers. I'd done this because I wanted to be outside and focus on ecosystems. What I wanted to do was protect them. By my junior year, I knew that I had to change the path. If I wanted to focus on protecting and supporting ecosystems and the communities that rely on them, it wasn't going to be through science. I needed to figure it out. So I was fortunate, I saved, I took a semester off from college, and I went and took a life-changing trip to South America. I know international travel is a big part of your guys' curriculum, and you guys know the kinds of effects it can have. I met some of the very same communities, actually, that RUNA ended up working with in Ecuador. And I witnessed some core challenges they face in their life. Now, a lot of these communities, they're not cash economies. If they want to support their families and their children, they do it through subsistence farming. But often if they need to buy textbooks, medicine, school clothing, etc., they actually have to cut down trees that are part of the rainforest and use that cash to support their kids. They don't have the same privileges a lot of Americans do. And they're so connected to the forest, this was always a hard and difficult thing for them. And watching this happen, it was a really important lesson for me. It was something that stuck with me. It was really light stuff for a 21-year-old. And this was one of those turning points that I was talking about. I had to make a decision. Even a decision to keep studying biology and be a biologist and stay on the path, that would have been a decision. So while the smart move might have been to stay on that path, continue fruitfully down it, get a PhD, work in a lab, the rest is history, right? I knew that that wasn't it. I knew that deep down that wasn't me or what I wanted to do. I'd worked in activism, I'd worked in nonprofits, I'd worked in policy, and I knew that what got me excited was crossing all those disciplines and spending time intersecting, finding the connections between them. And speaking of connections, it was through this process that I actually had the lucky accomplishment of starting to understand what I wanted to focus on. As I like to say it, and I like to encourage people to do, I kind of thought about what my mission and vision for my own life was. And what I settled on, and mind you, this has evolved a lot, and it should for everyone, but it's to improve or create better connections between communities, human and ecological systems, and livelihoods, all through the context of the landscapes and the spaces they inhabit. Okay, so I had this. It's great, sounds cool, But I had to start somewhere. And after those realizations I'd had in South America, I decided in my head, in my last part of school, like so many have, that a well-run, socially minded, environmentally focused business could be the answer. I'm a little bit critical of the triple bottom line concept, but I think it has a lot of validity to it, that kind of thing. So I actually completely changed. I kept my major. I still ended up studying marine biology. But I switched my focus to international development, sustainable design, and business. That's the beauty of Brown. I took 35 classes across 18 departments, and you could kind of say you focused on whatever you wanted as long as you got the core done. So I even interned, as he said before, at the Clinton Foundation for a summer, studying renewable energy technologies. So one night, think about it, I took a semester off, which meant that I graduated a semester late, and this is fall of 2008, which all of you remember was not maybe the best time to be entering the job market or graduating into the world. But at 3 a.m., the night before our final course selections were due, on a whim, I decided to sign up for the entrepreneurship class that some of my best friends from the beginning of college had taken. And like so many small decisions can, that we don't plan ahead, it ended up changing my life. I did not know that at the time. Here we are in this class. It's day 1, September. Professor's telling us all about how he runs it, the way he does it based on various Harvard-style curriculum. And then he looks us in the eye and he tells us, and for your final project, you're gonna write a business plan. And you have to pick your partner, like yesterday. So of course, I look over at my 3 friends, and I'd known them since the freshman week of college. In fact, Tyler, who I founded long-term, we had a couple co-founders, but he was the long-term person I ran RUNA with. I'd known him for 5 years at that point. I'd met him my first week of college. I'd like to say it was some intense conversation about philosophy on the college green, but it was actually a party in a dorm room, unsurprisingly. You know how that goes. Let's just say that these were not the first guys I expected that I'd start a business with. So here we are. We're in this entrepreneurship class, choosing partners we'd have to work with for the rest of the semester, let alone as I didn't know the rest of our life. And we jumped towards each other like dogs on a beach chasing a frisbee. Raise your hands. If you had to write a business plan tomorrow, do any of you know what it would be? You have way more of a clue than we did at the time. Way more. So here's where I'm gonna get to the part that you probably came out for. I'm gonna tell you about this random idea that a couple of college buddies came up with and dreamed up in a class. Really straightforward, super simple. Create a tea company that will support communities in the Amazon, partnering with them in an agricultural, forestry, and economic model that would create new livelihoods, change the way business was done in the Amazon, and energize millions of customers along the way. Super straightforward. Sounded really easy at the time. We, of course, looked at it just like a paper at first. That's what we had to do for the class. None of us were planning the rest of our 20s. None of us even really knew where we were going to be come January. What did we know about writing a business plan? At the time, and this was even before Silicon Valley, the TV show, most startups were software and apps. One of my business partners, not going to say who, he didn't even really know how to use a computer. So we tossed around all sorts of ideas that we thought were brilliant. eBay for fair trade crafts. You guys have probably heard of that. It's called Etsy. They started before us, and they did a much better job. How about doggy daycare for single people? It's a great idea, right? Guys and girls love dogs, meet together in a park, love happens. I thought that was a cool idea. I'm proud to say somebody, not just somebody, like 3 companies have started that in the last year. I'm really glad I don't have to run that business. It sounds like a nightmare, but I'm glad I had a good idea. Or hey, here's this random guayusa, it's guayusa, but we didn't know how to pronounce it at the time. Guayusa tea grows in the exact part of the rainforest where I had volunteered before, and my future business partner and best friend had studied the local languages. Sure, that sounds like a good one. Nobody had ever imported it before. And it's not like we stopped to think about why not. We didn't, in fact, think through many of those reasons at all. For example, working with indigenous populations who'd been marginalized or mistreated by outside communities for centuries? Check. Working in a Latin American country that had had 6 presidents in as many, I think, fewer years? Double check. drop the consulting gig that we had lined up, or the Fulbright, actually Tyler had a Fulbright, and just leave the country with our backpacks in the midst of the worst economic recession ever, completely irrelevant degrees, and no money. Triple check. But it didn't matter. We had a dream, and we wanted to use business as a tool to support communities and their traditions and their ecosystems. We wanted to create an awesome beverage with as much caffeine as coffee, a smooth feeling, and a boatload of antioxidants. As we thought at the time, the energy tea to end all teas. We even had a name for this dream, RUNA. Now, RUNA means, in the indigenous language of the Quechua communities we work with, a fully alive human being. It's a super powerful term. It's not just dude or girl or person. It's something they say with pride. They speak about themselves as we the RUNA, same way we say we the people in the preamble to the Constitution. But it had actually, in the sort of mainstream mestizo highland Ecuadorian culture, without knowing it, taken on a whole different meaning. It actually just meant like a dirty little thing. It was a derogatory term. So obviously with their permission, later permission, not at the time when we were writing the business plan, of course, we wanted to use this word to encompass the dream that we wanted to share with them. Also, it's a heck of a lot easier for consumers to pronounce than Wayusa. So I could spend 2 hours talking about the late nights we spent writing this plan, or all the challenges we've spent trying to create an international supply chain where none had existed before, with communities who've been treated like dirt for as long as they could remember. Not exclusively, but relatively. Or the fact that we were just looking at this like a project from the perspective of do-gooders. In fact, it was only when our advisors, we found some people who ultimately joined the company, not full-time as advisors, people from Stonyfield Farms or Pepsi or Safeway, who talked to us and they said, listen, this is fun, you're doing well, social enterprise, blah, blah, blah. What do you know about selling a product, and do you realize that you have a potentially amazing product on your hands? Only then were we even really convinced to do this as a business and that this business had potential. Or I could even just talk about, in terms of challenges, the time that a teenage monkey latched onto my leg and became convinced I was his father. No joke, it's true. I can show you guys a photo later if you want. Or, and this is my favorite story, just because I have to interject this one. You know, you think of the challenges of development. You think of people slogging through the mud. You think of lots of smiling kids. You think of rain showers. You think of remote communities with no cell phone. People ask me, what do I imagine when I think of development? I think of a particular moment. I think of a guy named Sharim. He was of the Shuar community. We went to visit him. He invites us for Carnival. Carnival just happened in Brazil. You guys probably saw the photos. Feathers, dancing. The only feathers that we saw were being plucked from the duck he was roasting. The appetizer was, I kid you not, pig nipple soup. And when he comes to greet us, in his hand, he has pig entrails, guts, covered in blood, and on his shoulder, he's holding a cell phone, which he's just sent an email on. That, to me, is the picture I now will forever have of development. So, like with so many other things in life, stories like this are as much about the people we meet along the way in magical places, who in our case taught us so much about the world and who we are. So let me tell you guys some stories about the Quechua, the main indigenous group that we work with. The Quechua get up at 4 a.m. every morning. It's still dark. Most people don't get up at that hour, except for airline pilots and cops and people who have to work the early shift. And their daily life in their village centers around the Guayusa ritual, which they do every morning. It's where they get up, sit around the fire, and they share their stories and their myths and their legends. It's how they come together as a family and bring their community spirit together. It's how they convince the younger generations about the value of their culture and hold it as one. It's how they become RUNA, fully alive. And once they finish the ceremony, they get up and they go out into these beautiful rainforest gardens, which create amazing food for them, but mimic the structure of the rainforest. They call them chakras. And they work in them all day. It's crazy. I get up at 3 a.m., I want to take a nap. And so they're doing this, and they're creating food for their families and a daily connection to the forest. So we sat and we shared, ultimately, all these beautiful ceremonies with them. But we come down to Ecuador, and we had this elaborate plan. We're going to create a Guayusa supply chain from scratch. We're going to start harvesting within a month. By the end of the year, and this was 2009, so by the end of 2009, we're going to be harvesting thousands of pounds and exporting it by the truckload. If plans had gone this way, we would be bigger than Pepsi right now. Did not work out that way. So setting aside the fact that that was just wonderfully, but also crazily ambitious to begin with, we quickly realized an even more important lesson in these Guayusa ceremonies we sat and shared with them. And it's the value of patience. It's the value of listening and creating lasting relationships with the community. That was going to be the key to everything. We met people like Silverio Mamayakta, who ultimately ended up being one of our head technicians. We'd go to his community and we'd sit down, and he wouldn't let us speak a word about business or our plans or our work. The first thing he'd make us do was just sit there around the fire and share our myths and our dreams and our own stories, to come together as people, just listening to each other. We'd go to other communities, and we'd come in there and we'd say from the get-go, we want to harvest Guayusa with you, we want to sell it, and they would laugh at us. Because remember, there was no supply chain for Guayusa before. Juan or Maria, they'd have it in their backyard and they'd go pick it and boil it fresh off the tree at 4 in the morning. So they'd look at us and they'd laugh and they'd say, that's funny, but do you actually want to buy our chocolate or our coffee? They didn't think we were serious. Nobody had ever taken their plants seriously. We had to prove ourselves to them, and we had to listen to their needs, not just come in and tell them what we wanted. We saw villages, and this is one of my favorite stories, that had super well-intentioned projects done by really well-intentioned organizations to create new markets or models. One example, we went to one community where they'd planted and created the machinery and the equipment for growing shiitake mushrooms, which, let alone the fact that nobody uses dried shiitake mushrooms that much, they were planning to grow them and they were going to sell them abroad. But what they failed to do was they made no market in Ecuador, no linkage or intermediaries, to the international market. And so I went there, and this machinery is just sitting, rusting, a hulk. I like to call this the field of dreams development model. You build it, and maybe they'll come. We talked to farmers about how we thought that we should work, us as RUNA as a nonprofit, and that they should be cooperatives, because that's what every well-intentioned, development-minded person had told us we should do. And we'd be there talking to these communities and tell them this is what we thought we should do. And they'd look at us, and they'd tell us in turn that that's not what they wanted. They wanted to actually do something and accomplish something. They wanted to sell their products, and they wanted to spread that culture and that plant through the world. But most importantly, as I said, they wanted to bring in incomes for their families. They'd seen cooperatives just descend into politics and internal fighting. They'd seen nonprofits or international agencies, like I described, come in with great intentions, but spend more time thinking about photos and donor reports than they were actually thinking about the impact they were having on the ground. It was experiences and stories like these, and these are just 3 of the many, many interactions we had. They're what brought all of our plans and dreams out into the light of day, baked them a little bit, dried them out, and turned them into reality based on what we learned. And we learned some key lessons. Because we learned first and foremost to listen, we learned to question our assumptions. Because we learned to question those assumptions, we'd opened ourselves up to the lessons the communities could share with us. And because we opened ourselves up to those lessons, the communities trusted us, and we had this amazing opportunity to work with them and co-create our vision for RUNA rather than just run around like chickens with our heads cut off. And we were able to bake that value in every step of the way and create a vision in collaboration with them. Okay, so I'm gonna stop philosophizing and telling stories. What did that vision actually mean? What did we want to accomplish on the ground? We still knew, as we had from day one, that our core mission was to use the power of international markets, in this case the beverage market, to support sustainable and inclusive livelihoods in the rainforest. And by doing this, we could create value for those communities. Economic value they could use to support their families, to grow and further enrich their communities, and protect their forests. But what's really important is that we didn't want to use this vision and these values as a charity or a marketing tool. I can get, and I will get more into our structure, and we do have a nonprofit associated, but we're not a charity. And I have a lot of respect for many of the one-for-one models, but it's not about just giving away something by doing business. RUNA's mission is to provide livelihoods for farmers, support farmers' livelihoods, I should say, by driving incomes to them through this amazing leaf that's been part of their lives for centuries, and do so through the market. And what that means is that we don't have to do anything special in our business model to actually accomplish what we want to. For every product we sell, that means we're driving income to those farmers. The more beverage we sell, the more income we can generate to the farmers, and the more they can support their communities in the forests. So obviously, after this period of time, we'd had a lot of food for thought. We had to be really intentional about how we wanted to plan this to have lasting positive impacts and success. Fortunately, we were also young and a little more flexible than people who had been in the beverage industry for 30 years, I later found out, and we were willing to adapt and change our plans as the path twisted and turned. So we evolved our structure and plans. First and foremost, we knew RUNA had to be two things at once. To be successful in that sort of business structure I just described, we had to really be a truly successful beverage company. End of story. And that's what we had to create in the US. We had to make a product that had clear benefits and distinctions that people could understand. And they had to believe us and believe our story and trust in us. It couldn't just be marketing. We had to strike that fine line. But in Ecuador, at the same time, we had to be a thoughtful, sustainable value chain. And I goof sometimes, but whenever possible, I say value chain. That's one of our core models, right? It's about the value that we create in collaboration with the farmers for their lives, but through this chain, not just about buying stuff from them and letting it go. We had to be able to adapt to the realities of both social pressures and the market as we'd see it. So this in turn led, and I'm going to try not to dive too far into this, into the ultimate structure we decided upon. Like I said, originally, we thought we were supposed to be a nonprofit so farmers could trust us because they've been screwed by businesses in the past. But their issue wasn't with business. Their issue was with the people and the way they weren't treated with respect and listened to. So although we didn't end up building our for-profit or our supply chain, value chain side in Ecuador as a business, or as a nonprofit, sorry. See, confuses me sometimes even. We ultimately did do that as a for-profit, but we created a nonprofit alongside it. The way we saw it is that the for-profit would initiate the value chain and create that value and create the market, while the nonprofit would work in parallel, not directly partnered in everything, but in parallel to ensure that those values were maintained and grown, and sometimes would act in opposition to the for-profit in Ecuador, whose main job was planting trees so that we could harvest enough guayusa to sell it to the US, where we had the beverage company. And like I said, that beverage company had to be the best thing it could and really focused on that mission. Now, lots of people these days get excited about hybrid structures. It's in vogue. We didn't do it on purpose. I consistently and constantly advise future would-be entrepreneurs to make as little complication as possible unless you have a good reason for it. And ultimately, through the couple years that we were working on this, that's the good reason we found. Because of those needs to have the dynamic forces working together but in opposition with each other, and the things that we needed support from the nonprofit sector to do. And the important thing is that although this was a complicated structure, it evolved based on the realities we faced, and we were listening to reality and adapting from it. Okay, so have I confused you guys yet? There's a lot of moving parts, right? I could go on. I could talk for 2 hours. I could talk about all the various decisions we made, the bits and pieces we did in Ecuador. I'd like to tell you that the rest is history, that it all worked out, and we're the size of Pepsi now, and why haven't you guys heard of me all the time before? But you guys know better than that. You know that no story like this, no business, no challenge, the rest is ever history. There's always challenges, but there's also always different accomplishments, and you move your goalposts further along the way as you achieve. And we've certainly achieved so much we wanted. We've planted literally hundreds of thousands of trees, protecting thousands of hectares in the Ecuadorian Amazon. We've supported thousands of farmers who now sustainably grow and harvest guayusa in their forest gardens. We export tens of thousands of pounds of organic, fair trade guayusa per month. Those farmers that we buy from, they've on average been able to raise their incomes by over 30%, or more, depending. And just as importantly, by working with them and creating a new definition of RUNA, literally that word that I said is a throwaway word, it's on the shelves in stores in Ecuador. It's created pride for them in a way, I mean, they've created pride. We're not going to take all the credit for this, but this process has created a new sense of pride in RUNA and its meaning that they didn't have. And they've now been more encouraged to stay in their communities. They're getting up early and drinking guayusa more often. And these communities are stronger and growing and stable in so many powerful ways that we cannot take all the credit for by any measure, but definitely we're proud to have had a part in. And just as importantly, as I said, RUNA now sells products in thousands of stores throughout the US and Canada, including right here in Little Rock. But like I said, the rest is not history. The story never ends. We face plenty of trials and tribulations along the way. Places we should have spent less money, and I could go on for an hour about those. Places that just spending a little more money would have made a huge difference in getting us further than where we are now. But that's life. We learned along the way. It's all a journey. Every step got us closer to the destination. But as you learn so often in business and life, that destination is always changing. And that right there is a lesson that I had to take for myself a year and a half ago. A lot of why I decided to co-found RUNA was being the right place, right person, right circumstances, right time. Like a lot of things in life. It's how probably half of us met our partners. It's about being ready for when the moment strikes. And no matter what anybody tells you, there's luck involved. We're all lucky to be in this room today. For me, myself, I was lucky to have parents who took great care of me. I got to go to great schools. I didn't have massive college debt. All kinds of luck. So here I am, me. I'm a marine bio major. I had no business starting a tea company. Marine bio says nothing about forests. I built this awesome company that I love. Literally, dozens of people jumped to come join us. It's amazing. I got to move to Ecuador. I learned more about business and communities and myself than I ever thought possible. And here I am. But here's the trick. You guys ready? Little secret, I bet you've heard this one before. The grass is always greener on the other side. As we saw it, the more that we grew RUNA, the more the company in the US would have to focus, as I said, on being the best beverage company we could possibly be. And the more we focused on being that best beverage company we could possibly be, a greater and greater share of our time as a team is focused on sales, operations, getting product to the right place at the right time, all the inevitable screw-ups in the factory, all of these mundane, difficult operational and relational things that are super important, but not what I was thinking about as a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed 21-year-old trying to change the world. So here's me, right? And like I told you before, my life's mission's around the connections between people, communities, ecosystems, livelihoods, and places. I'm spending 90% of my time in grocery stores, about thinking about how to spend more time in grocery stores. And let me tell you, it can be some arcane stuff. OI, MCB, EDLP, FIFO, LIFO, BOGO, POS, POP, DSD, EDLP. These were literally my daily vocabulary. Do any of you guys know what more than one of those mean? Okay, well you were in wholesale distribution, so that doesn't count. Really, really important stuff. It's how business gets done. I've been to thousands of stores, harsh fluorescent lights, dimly lit back rooms where you're literally stepping over rat poop, loading docks, overnight clerks who aren't getting nearly enough sleep, whose kids are probably waiting for them at home. And the last thing they want to deal with is me and my funny-sounding Amazonian tea. Or products not getting delivered. Or when they get delivered, they're frozen and exploded. Or when you try to talk to the insurance company about the fact that they're frozen and exploded and you insured for this, they tell you that it's not covered because of an act of God, the cold. The thing is, I loved it. I really did. I can joke, but as I hope you can all tell from the smile I still have on my face, it's one of the best experiences I ever had in my life. I never thought things that are so basic could be so fulfilling. And they're not basic, they're complicated. That's the lesson. The simplest things in life, they still take amazing work. I have so much more respect for people who work across all sorts of industries than I ever could have before this. It taught me about the world. It really turned me into an adult. And that wasn't through the speeches or the videos or the ego. It was through the hustle and the struggle. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. But here I am in early 2015. And I sit back and I thought it through. I turned 30. And I knew that RUNA needed another 4 to 5 years to really be a success, to really have a chance of having an exit. And most importantly, it had grown beyond the point where 2 people could run it together. It wasn't possible. You just get big enough at a point and you can't share everything equally. And one of us was going to have to focus not 90, but 100% of their time on sales, all that stuff I just described. And there's many people for whom that's amazing. I've met and hired lots of them. And there's part of it that was super appealing to me. But as I'm sitting and I'm thinking, and I put a lot of thought and attention into it in this context, because we had to make a decision, right? One of us was going to have to focus just on sales. I thought about and went back to that mission I'd set for myself. And I knew that this wasn't it. It couldn't be it. So I drank a lot of guayusa and really thought it through. And I recognized that this was just the first step in the mission I'd laid out for myself and wife. We'd connected communities, supported livelihoods and ecosystems in the places that made them come alive. That's exactly what I set out to do. And we did it in a unique and special way that I'll always remember and always be proud of. But I knew I wasn't going to be in the beverage industry for the rest of my life. And once I saw that, I knew deep down there was no turning back. I knew we'd left RUNA in safe hands and that I'd be able to go on and follow my own dreams. And it was time to take a step back from the weeds and take a bigger look at the forest. So, starting last spring, as you guys all probably heard, I started to take a step back from RUNA. By June, I was not full-time anymore at all. So let's go back. When I first started talking to you guys today, remember when just a few of you had any idea what you were doing for the rest of your life? I didn't even know what I was doing for the next week. This had been my whole life, my entire 20s, 7 years of it. I won't lie, I walked out of the office and I just kind of sat down on the sidewalk and I cried for a second. Not out of anger or sadness, but just the shock, the adjustment of it all. But I was lucky enough to have saved up and planned, because I took some time to get there, right? Like I said, it took 6 months. And I've always loved the world, I've always loved traveling, and I went to places that I'd always dreamed of. I went to Ethiopia. I went to a place called the Danakil Desert, 300 feet below sea level, often daily temperatures above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And I visited people from the Afar community. And these people, they sit there and they harvest salt. Barely any water, no shirts on, and their lives are hard. And they know it, and I know it, and I'm not going to gloss that over. But I talked to them, and you could also tell that deep down they were happy. They had their families, they've been doing what they've been doing for generations, and they found a way to be happy. So first of all, I'm never going to complain about anything ever again. But second, it really just made me take a step back and think about what's our place in the universe. I went to Chile. I went to places where in the US it would be a national park, and here it was people's backyards, where they ride horses and they herd sheep with this amazing gaucho spirit you can never put down. I went to Japan, stayed in houses that had been built the same way for thousands of years, climbed to the top of a volcano where literally my breath felt like snowflakes. I took photos, I made furniture, I learned how to brew beer. In other words, I was trying to become more RUNA, fully awake and alive. That spirit stayed with me. And all this taught me a few things. The corners of the world and the ways people live and build their homes and connect to environments and communities, it's still what I care about most. As I'm sure you guys are very aware, probably by virtue of being in this program, we live in a time of massive global change. Climate change, crazy things in the world, possible further recession. But at the same time, we all, I think, know, and I myself certainly do, feel like I want to do something about that. And finally, I knew that I loved being in the wild. It calls at my soul. I think it's a human right and something that we all gain and benefit from. But at the same time, cities are what make amazing things possible. Human civilization would not exist on the level it did today without cities. And the wilderness can't exist and be protected unless we make cities amazing, livable places that people want to be in while connected to what matters. So that brings me to here. This is all like the last 6 months, so that's why I said bear with me. I've had the good fortune, the hustle, and the foresight to have created something and made it a story worth sharing. Somehow you guys thought it was a good idea to come out and listen to me today. That started everything I'll do for the rest of my life. But now, again, I think I know where I want it to lead. So as of getting back to the US, which by the way was last week, literally last Friday, and for a long, long time I hope, I'm going to be working via 2 different projects on building physical spaces that support communities and livelihoods. On one hand, creating new structures for people to connect to nature in an easy way that fits in their lives, while also still being in a city. So it's basically a space in nature to retreat to and spend time and have community and education. Wonderful stuff. I can talk more about it. But on the other hand, and this will be a balancing act, but I'm excited, I'm also going to be working in New York City, building a community center and hub, trying to make Queens the tech innovation hub that it can be, while building a physical space to gather the community, support jobs, education, and food, and culture, and fun, all the things that make people fully awake and alive. Because I'm coming into it as a better person, and with all the lessons I've learned, I think this can even be better than the last things I've done. We have to walk through our lessons in life carrying that with us. So what are those lessons? What do I extract from all this? Let's take one last poll. How many of you guys would say and self-describe that you think your work in life is to make the world a better place for humanity? About what I expected. It's not a hard thing to get behind. Our generation, we're known for this, right? Study after article, after pundit, after talking head has shared the same basic trend. Our grandparents, the greatest generation, they were focused on just making it through the war, building a better life for their children. Their children, for all of us who are students who are roughly our generation here, our parents, they lived in an era of unprecedented prosperity and raised us to believe that we could shape the world in our image and that anything was possible. A lot of people have pushed back against that. And I want to tell you that I really believe it is possible. We can make a world a better place in our image. And our generation is coming into our own. We're going to have more and more responsibility for making that happen. We will have more and better chances to create lives and work that fit those visions. And I know a lot of people say we're entitled and we're spoiled, and I know it can sound like that, and everyone can be spoiled sometimes. But I don't think that we particularly are. I think that sometimes we get ahead of ourselves, and sometimes our dreams do outpace reality, but there's a flip side to every coin, and it means we have big dreams. We just have to learn how to focus and hustle. How many of you think you want to be an entrepreneur? It's trendy today. And every one of you, whether or not you think you can be, you can. Because it's about doing it in your own life. It's about creating your life in a way that allows you to create beautiful things, be flexible, and seize opportunities that come in front of us. You don't have to ever start a business or an organization to be an entrepreneur. You can do it in your job, you can do it at home, you can do it in your community. You can make any job great, and sometimes when you can't, it's easier and easier to find a new one. And I know that requires important things. It requires having a support system. It requires building a community around you. It requires a good education. And all those are hard, and not everyone in our generation or in the US or the world has access to that. But all of those things are improving and getting better. So do your best not to buy the hype, either the negative or the positive. Don't read too many magazines telling you how cool the founder of so-and-so is. And don't listen to too many people saying that, oh, we're not worth it. We are worth it. But more importantly, don't compare yourself. Looking inward is the best place for guidance. I try to meditate every day, and I've learned more about the world and myself from doing that than I have from any book or magazine I've ever read. Because it's not just about hard work. It's about your spirit, it's about your soul, and just like any good organization, it's about keeping yourself true to your vision. So like I've done, take time to ask yourself questions. Know not just what you want to spend your time doing, but if you're going to look back on your life, what can you say that you've accomplished? Who have you loved? What have you spent your time doing that made you and the people around you happy? Often, and this will often happen at the craziest times, those assumptions will be questioned by yourself, the people you care about, and the random people you meet along the way. The big turning points come out of nowhere sometimes. And oftentimes you'll do them without knowing what the future holds. But just remember that every decision has the opportunity to be the right one. Every path can unfold in a million different ways, and it can be the right one for you if you want it to be, and if that's what the universe wants for you. You might not know where that is exactly, where the destination you're going for. But part of the secret is taking steps in the right direction that you're most excited by, and being open to those paths and the possibilities in the world. Like I said, that destination may change, but if you keep your true north, you'll end up home. You'll end up where you're meant to be. As long as you take time to step back every once in a while and look at the compass, you'll find your way. Thank you. Great job.
Okay, we got time for some questions. And I figured, Abby, you would be the first, and Sarah, you'd be the second. So let's go to Abby first.
Thank you, Dan. I'm Abigail from China, second year student of Clinton School. I did the similar thing as you did 10 years ago when I was in college about the business plan to help local farmers to sell out their very unique foods to the regional market. But the big difference was we failed. I think our problem happened in production process.
Yeah.
So I think like RUNA Tea, you are also producing real product. And my question is very specific at this moment. How do you keep the same standards, same standard requirement for your local suppliers? I believe most of them are family suppliers or small suppliers to feed international markets requirement in the United States. And I think you have very good advisor group nowadays, and you got strong support from USAID. But look back in 2008, at the very beginning, how you figure out so many challenges about producing and connect the both in Amazon area and developed country in the US. Thank you.
Let me get your first one. I didn't quite follow the second, so maybe we can revisit that in a moment.
Okay.
So for the first one, what I will say is most important is you need to have clear standards that you have down on paper and that you can refer to. There's not a whole lot of formal food production, right? It's mostly subsistence. And oftentimes we've had to say we're not going to buy your product, which people were not happy about. They're used to people buying it, and they're used to the tricks they had to do to deal with the middlemen who often came trying to take advantage of them. So one, that. Two, we have our own factory. So the harvesting is done through the communities, but we actually produce the dried product on our own, and we built that factory and brought in the technical know-how with the hopes of eventually turning it over into a community partnership. And third, and I think most importantly, one of the first things we did is we built a really strong technical and agricultural outreach team. Our team, and it was mostly composed of local community members who were trained in agronomy or engineering, they would go out to the communities, work with them on their agricultural, organic, fair trade, harvesting, processing standards. And that knowledge wasn't formalized, and this is the fourth piece. We had a huge research program, not huge, obviously, but for our standards, where we actually researched how guayusa could best be grown, harvested, and managed in partnership with them. I could go on a lot more, but I'd say those are the four key steps.
Thank you.
Sarah's right there.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm Sarah, and I'm a first-year student at the Clinton School. So I have two questions as well. The first one, kind of as a follow-up, in terms of your value chain, is the factory located in Ecuador, or is it located in the U.S.?
Yeah, so guayusa actually, if you just pulled it off a tree, and this is unlike green or black tea to some degree even, it's very fragile, not fragile, it's dirt. Anyways, you have to process and dry it within 24 hours. And interestingly related, guayusa only grows via actual clonal reproduction, which means you plant shoots, there's no seeds, it never makes viable seeds. Which is interesting because it grows mostly in Ecuador, some in Peru, some in Colombia. And based on that and government regulations and the processing thing, it would be impossible really to export. And that's one of the big accusations people say, oh, well, you're just going to build this value chain and then you're going to screw the farmers and start growing it in another country where they have lower labor standards. And that's not possible. One important thing, though, is in terms of factories, just remember, when I say factory, I mean the processing facility for guayusa itself. To make the bottled beverages, we use co-packers, contracted manufacturers in the US. So that's a whole other ballgame, and it's actually been a big limiting factor for where we can sell it. We'd love to sell bottled guayusa beverages or energy drinks in Ecuador. There's no contract manufacturers there who can do it.
Interesting. So the product is then, that you're selling on the shelves in Ecuador is then shipped back
It's
to Ecuador?
dry tea, so tea bags, and those are made in Ecuador.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the second question has to do with scalability. When you started to get big and start exporting to the US and then moving forward as well, what systems did you have in place to ensure that this doesn't become a cash crop with the same issues as coffee or chocolate?
Or quinoa, which is what everyone asks me about when they think of that. There's a couple things. One, and the biggest, is that guayusa doesn't grow as well as a monoculture crop. So for those of you who don't know what that means, it's like palm oil or corn where you just clear cut everything and just plant guayusa, in this case. It wouldn't even grow well there. Not all plants that have similar value chains like ours have that benefit, but that's one. Two is we actually really made sure, and you pointed this out when you mentioned it, that we spread our farmer partnerships throughout many partners. We always made it clear we did not want it to be 80% of their income. We wanted them to have diversified incomes. And that's the third piece, is through the foundation, one of my personal favorite pieces of work. I talked about these agroforestry systems, the forest gardens, where they have plantains, they have ginger, they have trees that they can use for building their homes. We've worked with them to build more of these mixed-use agroforestry systems so that they have other crops, and with them, we're working to figure out what crops could also be cash crops to the international market. I don't think a cash crop in and of itself is a bad thing. I think that it's when, as you highlighted, it's something that's a local foodstuff becomes inaccessible, which none of these are. And it's also when they become overly dependent on any one cash crop. So we're trying to diversify it to avoid that problem.
Any other questions? Yes, sir. She's coming with a microphone right behind you.
I'm Abdullah Utabi. I'm a student of Euler, and I have a question. At the first of your speech, you mentioned that we should have a plan of our future ahead, what we want to be or what we want to do. And then you mentioned at the end, when you go further, you learn new things, you have experience, and when you achieve a goal, you come up with a new goal. My question is, which one? Should I plan something 10 years from now, or I would just leave it because after 10 years I will have more sources, more experience?
I mean, the short version is I think you have it right, which is, I use particularly the word vision, right? It's not necessarily that you know what job you'll have or where you'll be working, but what would you like in your life? What's the big idea? Knowing that there'll be 15 steps along the way. And my point is, you can look at that vision, and you'll want to check in on it and see how close you're going to that. But you'll want to take time also to address that. Is that still what you want to be doing? Have what you've learned, like in my example, working in biology, made me realize that it's not about hanging out with dolphins, which I never wanted to do, but you know what I mean. But it was about working in salt marshes day in, day out, and then studying samples in a lab and publishing papers for a living. And that adjusted my plan. So the big takeaway that I hope you would get from that is that the most important thing is taking time to think, taking time to even ask yourself those questions. I think so many people don't do that. And if you're actively doing that, and it sounds like you already are, I think you're halfway there, man.
I hope so.
Hey, Dan, let me ask you a question about your Queens project.
Yeah.
Because you talked about it a little bit, but tell us a little bit, where are you, how's that starting, what kind of spaces are we talking about? I mean, how's that happening?
Love to. So the organization I'm working with, previously called Coalition for Queens. As of this week, they just abbreviated it to C4Q, because that's what everybody calls them anyways. They're known for something very different. They're known for actually providing programming and training in coding and technical skills to underserved communities in mostly the projects in Queens. And it's amazing. People will come into this program, and in previous mostly service jobs, they'll be making $15,000 a year. They'll learn to code, they'll come out and make $90,000 potentially. And as I said, I think livelihoods are key to improving lives for people everywhere, done sustainably with a social mindset. But really, this organization didn't start just to do that. This was just their first program. Their idea is to look at the grand vision for an area, in this case, Western Queens, and how do we think holistically about what gives people happiness, what helps them support themselves, what makes the community vibrant, and what makes people there. And so I actually met the co-founders of this organization through a program called the New York City Venture Fellows that I was in. And we started nerding out about this vision. Because to me, like I said, there's two flip sides. Nature's important, but it's only valuable if we want to live in cities. And I think there's so many amazing things you can do to make neighborhoods more livable. And for them, their particular focus is how do we use technology? Because New York is now, I would argue, the second biggest technology hub after Silicon Valley. How could we make New York a more vibrant, focused ecosystem around technology, and particularly Queens, given office space and so on? So as we're nerding out, and this was back in like October, we really started thinking, well, let's think about a space. It takes an anchor, it takes physical space. That's where people gather. That's why third spaces are such a movement. What could we create there? We could make it office space, manufacturing, light high-tech manufacturing, like 3D printing, not steel mill. Bring it together with the amenities a neighborhood needs to be vibrant and livable, and potentially housing. So I go to those and more countries I named, come back, he calls me up, he's like, hey, you remember that thing we talked about? I loved it, you loved it, right? I'm like, yeah, it sounds great, I'd love to do that. He's like, okay, cool. Do you want to do that? So as of next week, I will be working with C4Q, trying to build this physical space, looking at places in Long Island City. I'm basically going into real estate, but in a socially minded, thoughtful, and integrative way. And it just seems to make so much sense.
A lot of sense. Any other questions? Let's give Dan a round of applause and thank you.
Thank you guys so much.